Hello, Robin. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Catherine. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited for our conversation. And I would love to start with you telling us a little bit about what inspired you to study cognitive behavioral methodology. And if you can kind of break that down into a little bit more of layman's terms, what it means, how it impacts the way that we operate as humans.
Yeah, so CBT or cognitive behavioral, it's traditionally known as cognitive behavioral therapy, but when it's in coaching, it's obviously just methodology because we're not doing
Mm,
therapy. What I love about it is that it's data driven. So we know it works because it's been researched so extensively and it works fast if clients engage with it. So we're not spending years with a person sitting on a couch talking. I mean, that's lovely and that works for some people, but I like results and I like achieving goals. And I tell my clients I want to become irrelevant in their life in that they don't need me anymore because they've learned the strategies and they can manage it on their own. And certainly if they need booster sessions, they can come back. But ultimately they've got the toolbox. And when we think about cognitive behavioral methodology, it really is understanding how you can manage your thoughts so that it results in positive behaviors. And I don't mean positive like unicorns and rainbows. I mean
mm,
behaviors that you want. Every
mm,
behavior, every emotion we feel comes from a thought. And society doesn't train us that way. It trains us that emotions just happen and we can't always control our reactions and then we behave certain ways. And that's just simply not true. That if we learn specific ways to train our brain, to manage our brain, it our brains become our allies rather than our adversaries. So it's really powerful and it's also
mm.
really empowering to people who follow this methodology.
Beautiful. Yeah, it sounds like we're harnessing that awareness so that we might stop kind of some of the self-sabotage behaviors. And
Perfectly said.
and so what have you found like as you're working with, I know you work mostly or started working mostly with women but now also work a lot with couples. So what have you found is like a method to pattern disrupt, to start to tune into some of these patterns and some of these cycles and some of these narratives that keep playing on loop and are creating like our outward life? What have you found as a way to notice that and pattern disrupt?
Oh, that's a great question. So there's so many strategies, and the strategies are not just canned strategies that everybody
Mm,
is going to respond to. It really is tailored to what works best for individuals. And
mm,
we try them out. We figure out, does this work? Did it achieve what you wanted? Was it too overwhelming? We kind of work through that. But the first place really is exactly what you said. It's taking a pause or time to identify what the thoughts are that are undermining us. And honestly, this can be one of the hardest steps to take. Because again, most of us, including myself, sometimes we just function and our thoughts just run rampant in us. And we don't take the time to realize, okay, what is actually going on? We react to our spouse or we yell at our coworker or we are burst out crying in the middle of the grocery store. And it's like, okay, why? What? It isn't just the topic, which I think most people can settle on, like, oh, I'm just unhappy about fill in the blank. It's okay, but what is the actual concrete thought that created that reaction or that emotion? And that is challenging because we're just not taught to do that in society. And when we don't do that, and I always, I talk to my clients a lot about the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And I said, if we don't do that with our brains run around like a toddler on caffeine, where it's doing its thing and we have no ability to wrangle it. And with cognitive behavioral methodology, it allows you to because you really start to pay attention to what is the thought that creates that. And if you still want to have that emotion, have at it. I tell my clients all the time, you can feel anything you want for as long as you want. But at some point when it's not serving you, or you don't want to feel that way, or you don't want to react that way, you don't have to, as long as you then put in the time to identify the thought and put in your strategies.
Totally. And it feels empowering in my body of like we can choose to hone these practices and cultivate that awareness. And like you said, it's one of the hardest things. I mean, that's a lot of what my meditation practice and yoga
Yeah.
practice have gifted
Hmm.
me, is that moment, that pause, that like point of intersection where I can be like, oh, this is the belief or the thought that I am projecting into all of my interactions, into all of my, it's what's creating all of my emotions here.
And I
And
get that because so I do yoga and meditation as well, and I love both practices. But some people just are not, they don't want to do either of those. It just isn't
mhm,
their thing. And what I like about the methodology that I use is that it's based on science. So I can teach my clients, okay, here's what's going on in your brain. Here's what you're actually doing when you do these strategies. And it isn't a theoretical concept. It is you are making physical changes in your brain when you do such and such. You are triggering this part of your brain when you use this strategy. And that resonates with a lot of people because,
mhm,
a lot of people have tried meditation or yoga or whatever it is, but this is absolutely undeniable science-based changes that they can make by developing a practice, just like you and I develop our yoga practice. Same idea.
totally. And there's so much that's coming out right now, like in the space of kind of blending science and
Mhm. Mhm.
spirituality, and really when you're dropping into meditation, what's happening in the brain and
Yes,
how you are accessing the subconscious and the brain waves are changing, and it's so exciting because
it
it
is.
does give us that. There's a part of us that is more willing to accept, it's more willing
Right,
to devote our time and ourselves to
right.
these practices because there's that tangible
Exactly.
evidence. And in my practices, what I've noticed is going, as I start to become aware of those thoughts and beliefs that you're talking about, a lot of it stems from childhood or stems
Mhm.
from beliefs that we orchestrated or
Mhm.
constructed while in childhood. And so
Mhm.
I guess the what I'm wondering is the difference between that. Feels more like therapeutic, right? Like you're sitting
Mhm.
down, you're diving into the past in an attempt to, you know, change, I guess, the present or change the outcome of the future. And versus what you do with clients, more of like the coaching lens.
Mhm.
And can you dive into a little bit of the difference between that therapy lens and more of the coaching lens?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a lot of overlap. I won't deny that. One of the things that I say, there's some clear lines between therapy and coaching. And one for me is always that when I work with individuals or couples and they bring up recent or current addiction, recent or current abuse, recent or current infidelity, and then recent or current loss of a significant person, those are topics that really are best served in therapy. You start there because it's going to get into some of the background. It's going to get into some of the really painful trauma that's involved with all four of those phenomenon. So therapy to me is absolutely for those really traumatic situations. I don't think it's appropriate in coaching, nor do I think that everybody who calls themselves a coach has any kind of training or education to manage that kind of trauma. So I always tell people, please look into the background of your coaches. Make sure that they are well trained in some level of understanding the
Mm-hmm.
brain connection. Um, Coaching and therapy can do this. I think my perspective is therapy does spend a lot of time in the past. And that's a challenge for me personally because my perspective is you can't change the past. There's nothing you can do to change the past. You can understand it, you can identify it, but do you want to live in the past or do you want to live in the present and then make your plans for the future? And that's why coaching is always aligned, even though I got my PhD in clinical psych and did a lot of that traditional work. Coaching was what I gravitated to because it was so proactive and it was so much about prevention rather than intervention, which is where I see therapy more often. I wish therapy was different, but our traditional model of therapy is really rooted in past situations and intervention. So when I talk with clients to make sure that they, first of all, don't fit into one of those four phenomenon categories, it's about, okay, do you want to spend time really diving into past situations? And some couples do. Some couples are like, yep, I want to talk things. And I'm like, great. I have a list of people because that doesn't even isn't even how I want to spend my time as a professional. I want to work with people who are
Mm-hmm.
like, yep, this is where we're at. we're not satisfied with where we're at, or if it's an individual where I'm at, and I want to make sure my future is addressed in a planful way with strategy and with a roadmap. And that's what makes coaching just fun.
Mm. And I'm curious, what comes up? I'm wondering. So as we start to talk about implementing strategy, right? Let's say you're working with a client or a couple, and we start to talk about strategy with them. That requires a certain element of what feels like profound self-awareness, right? For you to be able to have the foresight of to anticipate how you will react, or I guess, yeah, to really identify the patterns that you're already playing within. And do you find that a lot of individuals are willing to go there to like to own up to like, yeah, okay, everything that's happening in my life right now is because I'm saying yes to it?
I do think that's what differentiates people who are more interested in engaging in therapy and coaching, at least in my experience. My
Mm.
coaching clients or potential coaching clients are exactly what you said. They are ready to say, yep, this is not working for me. I have done it this way, and it's resulted in me not achieving, whether it's goals or where I want to get to in life. So they are really ready to do the work and dedicate the time to make that plan. Now, I will say that I don't think the majority of clients who start doing coaching know what the plan is. They just are like, I'm not happy, I don't like this, we're not
Mm-hmm.
happy, but they know that they want that to change. And that's what becomes the impetus for the work that we do. And then over time, as I help them reduce some of the emotionality that can come up in conversation, whether it's an individual or a couple, whether it's about their career or about their relationship, when we reduce the emotionality and they can think logically and strategically, then that's when they become more active in building their plan.
Yeah, let's dive more into that, this duality between of emotionality versus, yeah, more of a rational, like
Mm.
practical mind. The one that we are going to be creating these strategies from, and the one that we should definitely have at the table when we're thinking about our future. Um, but the one that's most often not really invited to the party. It's
Mhm.
always the emotional mind that's kind of running the show, especially when it comes to our romantic relationships. So let's dive into that duality a little bit more, and how you see and how you've seen, like in your practice and in your own life, like emotions running the show and what happens from that.
Yeah. Emotions running the show is rarely a benefit, even if they're positive emotions. Even
Mm-hmm.
positive emotions can overwhelm us, and we stop thinking logically. I mean, think about a basic example. College student who's out having a great time at a party. They take a drink, they take a second drink, they're having a good time, they're feeling good. They just want to keep going, and they make some choices not productive. So that is about as primal as I can get with that
Mm-hmm.
clarification. So, whether it's positive emotions or negative or dysfunctional emotions, they don't allow us to really make decisions that are based on what's best for us and aligns with whatever the plan is. Not that we have to guide everything in our lives by a plan. I mean, if you want to go have fun at a party, fine. As long as, again, at the party, you're making choices that still keeps you on track. It's not going to, waylay you for 3 days. You're not going to, be making choices that you're going to regret for, God forbid, hours or years.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're talking about, what you referenced, there's two really specific parts of the brain, and hopefully your audience can hold on for the 60 seconds. I'll do my quick neuroscience.
Yeah, we'll love this.
There's the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. Prefrontal cortex is right behind your forehead. And the amygdala is buried deep in our brains. It is the most primitive part of our brains. It's called the reptilian brain for specific reasons. And it's been there since our inception as organisms. Our prefrontal cortex developed over time as we kind of evolved into our humanness. The amygdala is something that is so inherent to being human. It's a lot of our emotions. It regulates good and bad emotions, but one of the predominant roles of the amygdala is to keep us safe. So when we were cave people, it would make us afraid of fire, so we would avoid the danger. It would make us afraid of the dark because there's saber-toothed tigers in the dark. It would do all those things to protect us. But unfortunately, the amygdala has not evolved very much. And now it makes us afraid of things that are not life-threatening. Getting up to do a presentation, going out on a first date, um,
Mm.
having an uncomfortable conversation. Those are all scary and uncomfortable, but they're not life-threatening. And we really don't need the amygdala to do its evolutionary fight, flight, or freeze in those situations, but it still does. On the flip side, the prefrontal cortex, which, as geeky as this sounds, if I had a favorite part of the brain, that would be my favorite. Biased, but the prefrontal cortex is all about emotional regulation, strategy, logic, data, reality. And the magic happens because these two parts of the brain can't function simultaneously. So when the amygdala is crazy and running us, the prefrontal cortex shuts down. So in my very light example, that's what makes us have the third drink when we said I was only going to have one, because the amygdala is saying, come on, we're having a good time. Or, yes, let me get into the car with people I don't know, which would be horrible. But the
Mm.
amygdala hopefully kicks in and says, this is a bad idea. This is not safe. And it pulls us back. And that's great in those situations. But when the amygdala is firing for good or bad reasons, the prefrontal cortex is not engaged. So our strategy, our logic, our rational thinking is really limited, if not completely non existent. Thankfully, the reverse is also true. When we get our PFC, our prefrontal cortex, engaged and we actually actively engage it, it shuts down the amygdala. So our anxiety,
Mm.
our self doubt, our uncertainty, our imposter syndrome, all of those negative what ifs that really can ruminate and really overwhelm us, those are shut down. And that to me is the best part of the work that I do is I teach people how to trigger their prefrontal cortex so they can think in ways that help them and benefit them. It doesn't deaden you, it doesn't numb you to your feelings. It just allows you to lead with your prefrontal cortex. And hopefully then your amygdala comes in with emotions that actually benefit whatever the plan is.
I love that. Thank you for that description. The example that comes up for me when you said, when you're explaining that, and when you say, like, what we're getting to is so that we can trigger the prefrontal cortex is, for
Mhm.
example, like if I'm if I want to take a big leap in my business
Yeah.
and my amygdala comes on and is telling me all the reasons why I shouldn't, all of the ways that I'm going to fail, all the things
Mhm.
I'm going to be homeless, I can't do it, blah, blah, blah. Then the
Exactly.
prefrontal cortex might come in and say, okay, but what is actually the worst case scenario? Like a question that's tangible that I can legitimately kind of walk through and be like, hey, worst case scenario, if I legitimately lost everything, I could still move home. I would still have a
Right.
roof over my head. I would still have my friends. I would still have food. I would still, I would be okay. And
Right.
then from that place, I can then move forward without being,
Right.
in fear and terror, like
Exactly.
paralyzed.
And that's the trick. It's for many people when they start to exist out of anxiety, fear, or related emotions, they don't take that next step of triggering their prefrontal cortex. And unless you do, it won't happen. It doesn't happen automatically. I mean, it can for people who have been doing this for years and they've trained their brains to go right to
Mm-hmm.
that part of triggering and engaging the prefrontal cortex. But again, for most people, they get caught in their amygdala reactions. And then that's where the rumination comes from. That's where the sleepless nights come from. That's where the panic attacks come from. And so when we can learn to get to our prefrontal cortex through actively and strategically engaging it, that's where everything starts to work better. When I've watched clients, I love watching them on the video screen because I can see in session when I teach them this and walk them through different scenarios, it is a visual transformation that they calm down. I've had people sobbing, and as soon as I walk them through strategies to trigger their prefrontal cortex, they stop crying and they're able to talk, and then it builds and the momentum builds, and it's really exciting to watch them be able to do that.
Yeah, that sounds beautiful.
Mhm.
And I'm curious what instigated your work with women in utilizing, this knowledge and this methodology, and then the pivot to it seems like more with couples. I know you still do both, but it seems like you're focused a little bit more on couples nowadays. So talk about that journey because I eventually want to dive a
Sure.
lot more into the, couples and romantic aspect of this.
Well, I can't take the credit. I was raised by a really wonderful, powerful woman who had
Mm.
very, uh, really kind of outside of the box perspectives on women and women's power. So I was raised by one of these women, and my sister's
Hell
like
yeah.
this, I'm like this, and whether it's genetic or teaching or a lovely combination of both. So ever since I can remember, I've always thought about women and girls. I've written a book about that's specific to girls. I love working with females, and one of the reasons is because women are trained by society and cultures to downplay their power,
Mm.
to ignore, to be humble and to be quiet and to be submissive. And that is all BS. I just worked with a client this afternoon, new client, and she said, I said, so you bring in your resume, you bring in this, you bring in your performance reviews, and you just hand it to them and say, this is why I think I'm a good candidate. She's like, oh, I really don't like boasting. I'm like, that's not boasting. That is data that you didn't even I mean,
Yes.
it's just
Yeah,
you're not
it's
even
just
getting to
facts.
the part where you're saying, this is what I deserve. You're simply saying, here's all the data of why you should hire me. And she had a
Mm-hmm.
really hard time with it because that is not how women are taught to think
Mm-hmm.
and then to act. So to me, I love working with men, but there is something so exciting when I see women just stepping into not their power. I mean, that's easy to say, but who they really are with
Like
and
awakening
shedding,
to
yeah,
that.
they shed all the
Mm-hmm.
societal cultural BS that is just holding them
Mm-hmm.
back and getting embedded in their amygdala and
Mm.
then retraining it. So no, now we think with our prefrontal cortex, which is just, hey, this is who I am. This is what it is. I don't need to, downplay it.
Mm. I
Now the
love
shift,
that's such a beautiful. I want you to keep going, but I just want to double click on all of that.
yeah,
Yes, to women awakening to their power and allowing for themselves to be powerful.
yeah,
It's like, I mean, it goes all the way back to the witch rune. It's a whole thing. It's a
yes,
huge part of
yes,
my yeah,
yeah.
inquiry right now. But continue on in
Yeah, no,
sharing your
it's
journey.
absolutely true that I just, when I say that, women are powerful, it's just sometimes we're not allowed to be, or we succumb to these absolutely irrational beliefs about women and women's power. And now more than ever,
Mm-hmm.
we can step into it more fully. I listened to a great podcast, Wiser Than Me. I recommend it to all of your listeners. It is one
Cool.
of the best. It's basically an interview with women over age 70 and how they're powerful. And I just listened to one about, and her name is escaping me, of course, but she led a lot of the protests around farm workers in California back in the day. And she said, if women aren't going to do it, there's going to be no peace in the world because women are
Yeah.
driven by harmony and community and peace. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not their sole purpose, nor is it their sole job, but
It's
we
like a
have it.
natural byproduct of
Yes.
our being
Yeah.
in our like full embodied
Yes.
feminine. It's a natural
Absolutely.
byproduct. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. It's one of our strengths. So why
Mm-hmm.
not?
Mm-hmm.
And the couple switch came because as I worked with all these amazing women, these are executives and C-suite and small business owners who are starting out. And of course, eventually their relationships would come up because, it dovetails. When we're happy in
Mm-hmm.
one area, we'll be satisfied in the other and vice versa, hopefully. And I kept trying to get them to a place where they could have that strategy in their relationships. And I realized they were doing these amazing things in their professional lives. And so I started asking, well, how do you manage conflict at work? How do you, manage a team of 20? How do you have difficult conversations? How do you tell people, how do you delegate responsibility? They could, without a pause, tell me how they did it at work. And then when I'd say, well, do you do that in your relationship? How do you manage conflict? And they're like, oh no, that's different. I'm like, it's not actually. It's
Mm-hmm.
exactly the thing. So I'm a big advocate of not reinventing the wheel. So tell me what you do well at work. And now let's put this into your personal life, whether it's managing your family, your spouse, whatever. And the more I thought about it, I was like, okay, if we started pulling some of these, what apparently are disparate concepts from the business world, and applying them in our personal lives, could it achieve the same success? So I started experimenting. I started creating a framework around this. And oh my goodness, it absolutely does. It's
Mm.
easily translatable, and you don't need an MBA from Harvard to understand this work. These are not, I don't have a business degree. I've learned and I've read over time, but these are basic concepts, a mission statement, delegation of roles and responsibilities, key performance indicators, and they work in our relationships in a way that definitely triggers our prefrontal cortex, which then allows us to get the results we want instead of sitting down to have a conversation, our amygdala takes over, and now we're all emotional. And I don't mean us as
Hmm.
women, I mean us in a relationship, male, female,
Yeah,
non-binary,
us as
whatever,
humans.
as
Yeah.
humans, exactly. So do you want to keep functioning out of your amygdala, or do you want to have a strategy for your relationship? It seems
Mm.
like an easy question to answer, in my opinion.
Yeah, and when you frame it like that, it makes so much sense because, and especially with the foundational knowledge of what you shared about the prefrontal cortex and that triggering that needs to happen, that makes so much sense when you're because when we analyze our relationships through the lens of a business, through the lens of like, what's the mission statement? What are the, yeah, KPIs, which that's, I'm interested in how some of these things translate. Like, what are some examples of KPIs and things like that? But when you look at it through that lens, I see how it triggers that prefrontal cortex of like, we're moving from that esoteric, emotional, like like I said earlier, kind of tethered to our childhood wounds and those cyclical patterns, and
Right.
we're moving from that space down more into the tangible, like material, like what's the word? Like articulatable, articulatable. Like we can articulate it to our partner in a way that feels less overwhelming than trying to articulate or process or understand the generations or decades
Right.
of trauma that might be
Right.
in the emotional aspect of it.
Yeah, it becomes more concrete. When I have a
Mm-hmm.
couple in my office or in my virtual office, and they're saying, well, I just don't, we've lost some of that love. I'm like, okay, let's operationalize. What does love mean? What does it look like to you? Well, I want my spouse to pay attention to me. Okay, what does that actually mean? What does it look like? I break it down. We get into the minutia. So then they're defining, well, that would mean that, when I come home at the end of the day and I come in to say hi, that he or she stops for 3 seconds and just looks at me. That is very concrete and that is very achievable. Now you've told me exactly what it means to you to feel loved. And we can do
Mm-hmm.
everything in a relationship. We can break it down so that it is so specific that again, it's either a choice, okay, I'm going to do those things, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really committed to this relationship if I'm not going to do at least 80% of the things that, work for my significant other. So it's really I find it really fun because we're not getting caught up in what happened 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Because and that if that's an important conversation, and I've had couples who said, we do want to dive into the past. I'm like, that's great. Okay, glad you know that. Let me get you some names. Because if that's important to you, then this isn't the right space. Just as you and I both know that not every therapist or every coach works for everybody. And
Mm-hmm.
methodologies have to work for a couple for there to be any results. For me, I know that the way I help couples can work really quickly if it works for the couple. And it's nothing about the framework, it's nothing about me or them. It's just it has to be a good match.
And I assume you can apply the same strategy or way of working with a couple no matter where they are on their journey, right? So,
Mhm.
do you work with couples who are like, I guess, more in the infancy of their
Mhm.
commitment, like let's say engaged or
Mhm.
newlyweds? So you do, okay,
I do, yeah.
interesting. And so, is that more of like it's more preventative, right? It's more of the let's be on the same page from day one.
Yeah, I would say it's more preventative, but I do see most of the work I do as preventative. So even couples who have
Mm,
been married for decades and they're just in a rut, to me, it's preventing them from ending up divorced. Ideally, I've had
mm,
couples that it didn't work out, and then the coaching switches to a business strategy for the dissolution of their relationship
mm,
and making it an amicable or at least civil divorce instead of antagonistic. So I have worked with couples from the very beginning when they're thinking about moving in together, when they're first engaged, when they're first married, all the way through couples who have been married for decades and they're just not achieving what they want in their relationship. And then I never consciously work with couples who are about to enter a divorce. But again, sometimes couples are just so far gone that the relationship is not going to be fixable. And so now they want, now once they make that decision in coaching, now I can help them make their divorce as strategic as possible. And I don't mean strategic like who gets what. I mean strategic so that they end on a note that they still feel, positive about their decision. I also do work with individuals who are dating and who want
I was gonna
to
ask
have a
that.
little more strategy around their dating relationship. So it's fun.
Yeah, and I'm curious. So what would you advise someone, let's say who's listening, who's single and
Uh-huh.
they're dating and I guess I feel like at this point, let's say they're in their 30s and they've gotten clear on what they want, but they maybe keep finding themselves in the same dynamic or calling in the same type of partner who's missing a specific love language or missing, you know, vulnerability or that something, just missing that one
Mhm.
thing. They find themselves in the same dynamic. How do you work with somebody? How do you advise them in that part of their
Yeah,
life?
it's so much fun because it's a lot more directive, meaning that they have all my clients have homework to do and they work on things, but it's
Mm,
something about the individuals who are in the dating phase that seems to be much more concentrated in their work. So first and foremost, it's making an avatar. So in business, it's called an ICA, an ideal customer avatar. And it provides a framework of what a business, who a business is going to target in terms of marketing and where they're going to spend their money and where they're going to spend their time. So with it's uncoupled individuals, it's an ideal companion avatar. So same initial, same acronym, but different spin. Same idea though. It's creating who ideally you want. And I don't mean please don't make it like I need all of this and it needs to be
yeah.
perfect. We're not
They need to
achieving
be
that.
like 5'7" and brunette and their
Exactly.
left earlobe has to be
Not getting down to the
two.
flat. Right.
Yeah.
Is just what do you really want to look for? And again,
Hmm.
this isn't just like, okay, now here's my template. It is engaging your prefrontal cortex, not to just keep repeating myself, but it allows your prefrontal cortex to say, okay, that's the type of person we're looking for. And it primes your brain to start paying attention to that potential. It just, like when we go to look for a new car, and I decided years ago I wanted a Jeep, and now then I saw Jeeps everywhere. And it wasn't because there was this all of a sudden influx of Jeep owners. It's simply I told my brain, I want a Jeep. It works the same when it comes to relationships. It doesn't guarantee it, but it gets your brain to start just in sometimes subconsciously, sometimes consciously start looking for that individual. And then once you have the ICA, part of that process is developing your list of negotiables and non negotiables. Because too many people, when they're dating, they see someone bright and shiny and they're
Hmm.
like, that's fine. I can overlook that or I can do that. And those are the things that are going to bite you in the butt later on in the relationship. So you come up with your list of things that are absolutely not negotiable. I'll use an example from my personal life that I write about in my book. So I could not be in a relationship with someone who was mean, especially to people who are taking care of us. So restaurant workers, custodians, secretaries, like people who are the backbone of so many organizations. That would just be a non-negotiable for me. I couldn't handle it.
Hmm.
It would be
Hmm.
embarrassing. It would be horrifying. It would tell me a lot about their character. Not negotiable.
Hmm.
So luckily, my husband is really generous and wonderful to people. One of my negotiables, I love yoga. I mean, I would do yoga over any other activity or exercise. Well, not activity,
Hmm.
but exercise.
Hmm.
He hates yoga. I mean, really hates yoga. I have to bribe him. And I have used lots of different ways to bribe him. And he will do it sporadically with me, but he's not as excited about it as I am. That's negotiable. I don't need someone to do yoga with me for me to love it.
Hmm.
So if he does it once in a while, if he never did it with me, that would be okay with me. But having to clearly define what are things that I can concede to and what are things that I absolutely will not allow, that keeps it clear so that when you go out and meet someone bright and shiny and looks good on paper, you actually can check your mental list. Or if you have I've had clients keep their physical list with me, them. And if there are things on that non-negotiable list, then don't waste your time or money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I'm engaged actually, but it brings me back to when I was dating a lot and calling in my partner and creating that list, creating my negotiables, my non-negotiables, and that process of creating that list required well
Mm,
a lot of attention and the ability or the willingness to really dive in and ask myself why each thing is on each side of that list.
good.
And I'm sure you work with your clients to do the same, because what I found was there was this over romanticizing of some things on the list when and it was this like attempt for me to bypass the power that I had within myself to give myself those things,
Mm,
right? It's like I don't want to, or for example, I want to call in someone who goes backpacking because I want to go backpacking, but I don't believe in the ability of myself taking myself backpacking. Like I need somebody to
mhm,
take me, as opposed to, well, could I just take myself backpacking? And then
mhm,
like if I met somebody who didn't, so it offers, it invites us to have that deeper level of self inquiry of like, is
mhm.
this an authentic desire that I have for my partner, or is this an egoic desire or a desire that I have coming from a place of disempowerment?
Yeah. And I think our personal board of directors really helps with that. So when I work with not uncoupled individuals around this, I do ask them to do the one thing that a lot of people resist, which is, okay, now I want you to take your avatar, your ICA, and your list of negotiables and not negotiables, and I want you to run it past who are your closest friends and family. And that's your personal board of directors. It does not need to be extensive. So my personal board, I mean, not if I was dating, actually, my husband was my friend for 20 years before we got married. So I would talk to him, I would talk to my sister, and I would talk to one other friend of mine who is, they're like my trifecta. Those are my three go-tos. They would be the people that in a dating situation, I would run past my lists and my avatar because, and the self-awareness is so important, Catherine, but sometimes there is just a limit to how truthful we are with ourselves. And
Totally. Yeah.
our personal board of directors can be the ones that hopefully say, do you really love backpacking that much? Or is that just something that you used to do? And I don't
Right.
know the last time you went backpacking. Or,
Yeah.
is that really important? Or, God, I remember this one person you dated, and one thing you loved about him or her was that thing. And I don't hear that.
Uh-huh.
Like they become your foil almost to call you out or point out things that you might have forgotten or you've overlooked because you're trying to get to, I don't know, an unrealistic ideal. So having that time to reflect yourself and then having those external voices who know you really well as you know yourself, and in some cases in a better or different way, that can provide, again, additional data for your conceptualization and ultimately for your prefrontal cortex.
Yes, I love that addition. I love that caveat and I love the conceptualizing of a board of directors being
Mhm.
you're just like try people and being okay, call me out on my blind spots, go for it, do it.
Exactly.
Show me
Just
where
like
I'm
what the
missing.
board does in business. I mean, the board's
Uh-huh.
job in business is to say, okay, the CEO is running things, but did we think about this? Or do we look at it this way? Or have we considered
Hmm.
this? Like that's an important piece of really developing a comprehensive approach to your personal, dating or life or relationship.
Yeah, I see that. And let's pivot into like couples. Let's say they've been, well, I'm selfishly curious about like the milestone before you embark on the big commitment, right? You're in the engagement before you fully commit. I mean, you're already committed, but before you
Mhm.
sign the papers, dot the I's, cross the T's, do all the things. And it's been important to me. It's funny actually growing up. My dad had a very similar um framework for working in relationships. He actually had a paper that he made and he printed out for me when I was, I don't even know, probably 16, had my first boyfriend. And it was questions like these, like getting really clear on our
Right.
money values and getting really
Yes.
clear on, you know, how we relate to family and vacation and all of these different aspects of life. And I remember him giving it to me and me just like rolling my eyes. I was, a teenager and being like, that is the least sexy piece of paper I've ever seen. Like, you expect me to bring this on a date or bring this to a potential lover and be like, let's get on the same page about our future. And he just it's a lot it reminds me very much of the energy that you're and the framework that you're bringing to this conversation, which I love. And now in my now that I'm 30, I can look back and I see how wise it is, someone
Mhm.
who's had more years, who's been through multiple divorces, looking back and being like, please use this.
Right. Right.
And so in working with couples, whether they've been together, it doesn't even matter how long, but in that commitment and working to get on the same page about things, how do you start? What are some of the unsexy questions that we should be thinking about?
Yeah. So I always start, and I get that a lot, Catherine, where people are like, Robin, like relationships are different. Like they're about love and sexual attraction. And I'm like, yeah, those are part of it, but those are the bells and whistles. If you don't have
Mm-hmm.
a foundation, those bells and whistles are going to fade. And your foundation is
Mm-hmm.
what maintains you through the ebbs and flows. I use the analogy like I love ice cream. I mean, I love ice cream, but I would never create a ice cream making business because of my love of ice cream. I would have a business plan, I would have a strategy, I would have the conversations with resources in order to create a solid foundation
Mm-hmm.
for that. And then all my great flavors of ice cream, those are the bells and whistles. So same
Mm-hmm.
thing with relationships. Love and sexual attraction are just those are the bonuses. But the
Mm-hmm.
platform it starts on is what those grow from. So the unsexy, I always, with every couple, I always start with a mission. I always ask them, tell me how you understand a mission statement. What are mission statements for? And they
Mm.
can tell me, they can recite all the good reasons for an organization to have a mission statement. And it's about, direction and unification and just having a similar, guide, basically a perspective. So, and then my challenge question is, okay, so what is your relationship mission statement? And I got to tell you, 95% of couples do not have one. And the 5% that say they do don't really, because usually I get, well, no, we just know it. It's in our heads. And so I love it.
We just
Write down,
feel
I want you to
it.
make a piece of paper and I want you to write down what your mission statement is. And oh my gosh, it is usually, at best, it's loosely connected. And at worst, it's completely divergent. So they kind of
Uh-huh.
look at each other like, wait a minute, what? And I'm like, this is why I asked the question. So the first
Oh,
step is
interesting.
helping them build a unified, clear mission statement around their relationship. And it has the same benefits as when a business has a mission statement. And then we work on vision statements as well, which is more about where the relationship is really going. So it's not sexy necessarily. I mean, I do a lot of work helping them with their actual sensual and sexual lives as well. But we're not going to get to that until we actually know what your platform is. Because every time that couple, and what I've watched couples in relationships do, is they will start to use their mission statement as it should be, which is a dynamic tool. So one couple I worked with, they were going away for the holidays years ago, and they were going to the husband's family, who were boisterous and loud and a
Mhm.
big family, and she was an intense introvert. So she
Ooh.
remembers getting more and more agitated. She was getting frustrated that her husband wasn't picking up on this. And so she said, Dr. Robin, I went into the bathroom. I pulled out my mission statement because I encourage people to keep them on them, whether on their phones or in their wallets, whatever. She's like, and I sat there reading it over and over again until my brain realized if I go out there and react the way I was going to react, that would not hold true to our mission statement. It would not align with our mission statement. And so she took time to, again, engage her prefrontal cortex, and she was able to go out there and be in a place where her behaviors and emotions supported their mission statement, which supported the relationship. That's incredibly powerful. In that
Incredibly.
moment, she didn't go with her amygdala. She took the time to engage that part of her brain which aligned with what the couple really wanted. And that to me is just real, it's really fun and it's really powerful to listen to when couples get why they're doing these things and how they can actually use them in a very, very dynamic way right in the moment.
Yeah, it feels like a very powerful tool because even just I think at the beginning of a relationship when you're wrapped up in the lust and
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
love and the hormones and endorphins and even just the youthfulness of it, right? Like even if you've moved out of the honeymoon stage, maybe you don't have kids yet or you haven't gone through a death in the family or you haven't, had to overcome some of those larger obstacles that life has in store for us, like inevitably has in store for us. And so our mission statement, if we aren't clear at the beginning and really
Hmm.
dictating it with each other, crafting it with each other, then it becomes wishy-washy, right? It becomes a product of the circumstance and it becomes like it might start out as something a little bit, like my mission is to love the other person, but that's not
No, it's not enough.
enough,
It's not.
like
It's not clear and it's not concrete. What, and I jokingly, sort of jokingly say, the Hallmark Channel and Disney have taught us that love is you wish and hope and pray that a relationship will work. I'm like, holy mackerel. I would never wish and hope and pray my career went a certain way or, a road trip went a certain way. There's a general plan of where you're going and that your car needs gas. And yet our relationships are just like whimsy and
yes, that's the
fragile,
word.
no concrete planning. We spend the statistics, I don't know if they'll come to me. The average couple spends on average 250 to 300 hours planning their wedding, which is typically,
Mm-hmm.
anywhere from 4 to 8 hours and upwards of 20 to God knows $100,000
Yeah.
on their 1 day event. And I
Mm-hmm.
always wonder how many couples actually come close to that in planning their marriage, their
Mm-hmm.
before they're actually in it. And my guess, at least based on the divorce rates, not many, because we get caught up, like you said, love, lust, the details of the wedding, which are super exciting, but that's not what's going to sustain the marriage. So what's the plan? What is the actual plan to make this marriage a lifelong? And you plan, I mean, the loose plan, of course we're going to be together forever. And my question is how? How do you know that? How are you going to make that happen? How are you going to make sure you do everything in your power to do this? And a lot of times I've heard, Catherine, people are like, well, marriages are hard. And I cringe when I hear that. If
Me
you want to prime
too.
your brain in the worst way, yeah, tell
Yeah.
me marriages are hard. And then your brain will be like, oh, this is hard. And it will be hard. Marriage
Mm-hmm.
and relationships are not hard. They take five things: diligence, dedication, attention, nurturement, and strategy. Those five things guarantee, almost guarantee, I shouldn't say guarantee, but come pretty close to ensuring that your relationship is going to be long term and satisfying with those five things. But if you wish, pray, and hope, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. A couple things I want to double click on. I mean, I think anyone who's listening who has that like romantic kind of naivete about them, which is definitely me, who grew up watching the Disney movies, grew up watching the Notebook and the rom-coms and just being like, love conquers all, and like that's it. And then, you know, as I get older and I've witnessed multiple divorces just within my like parental
Yeah,
figures, just within,
yeah.
my mom and dad and their subsequent marriages after each other. And with that comes just alarming understanding that love is an evolving
Yes.
it's an evolving force. It's not
Hmm.
simply an emotion. It's not even just
No.
an action. It's an evolving force and it's
Mhm.
dynamic. And there's so much at play, whether it be each other's, you know, the, like cyclical spiritual journeys and the wounds that we're here to evolve or the obstacles that life throws at us. Like I said, and love isn't like going to be enough. There has to be that wherewithal of like what happens when when we feel like we're drowning, you know, or when we need
Right.
a life, we need the, what's it called? The life vest, or the thing you grab onto in the water.
Oh,
Can't the
a life preserver or
life
yeah.
preserver? Yeah, whatever. The thing they throw to you when you're drowning in the water. Like we need that. And so this mission statement
Yes.
feels like that's exactly what it serves as,
Right.
of like this lighthouse when we're in choppy water and it's
Yeah.
dark,
Great analogy.
and that experience that you shared about your client felt so beautiful to visualize, in that it is this lighthouse. It's like we can come back,
Mhm.
we can, if we need to separate ourselves for a moment, like
Yeah.
tune back into what the mission, where the
Right.
lighthouse is in our body,
Right.
and then move forward. It
Right.
I can just I'm It just feels monumental in terms of
Mhm.
what you can avoid. And what's funny is like coming back to that unsexy, thread of like when you're having these conversations, when you're doing this work with your significant other, inherently it creates more intimacy. Inherently
Exactly.
that physical attraction will most likely
Hmm.
like become greater as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's not, and again, I love the critics. I really do, because I love having the conversations, not to convince people, but just to support what I know.
Mhm.
And, a lot of people will say, well, so we just are supposed to ignore the problems. I'm like, I never would ever say that. That's actually
Mhm.
a very bad strategy. But example that I gave, what it allowed is she was able, the wife was able to get through the family dynamic, the family party. And then later on, she and her husband had a conversation when they weren't surrounded by family, and when she was calmer, and when his emotions were a little more neutral, because his emotions were really super over the top, positive and high, because he was around his family members. So they were able to have a conversation that wasn't based on a reaction or defensiveness on the husband's part. It was based on, you know what, I was really uncomfortable in this situation. And then he applauded her use of the mission statement. She, according to them, he pulled out his mission statement when they were, or their mission statement, his copy, when they were having the conversation, so he could make sure that what he was saying. And he said, it helped me not be reactive. It helped me not be defensive, because here she was using it, being vulnerable then to share and not
Mhm.
avoid it or downplay it. It was like, that really didn't work for me. How are we going to change this in the future? How are we going to make it work for both of us? And
Mhm.
I just love the power that it puts back into the hands of the couple, instead of just being run by their amygdala and their emotional reactions, which I do truly know undermines couples so much. And it doesn't have to.
Mhm. And it really feels like each individual is getting back on the same team, right? It's
Yes,
like we
yes,
are moving towards the same objective
right.
here.
Exactly.
We just need to, translate what each of us is experiencing so that we're speaking the same language.
Yeah, it becomes a true partnership. I mean, people throw that, oh,
Mhm.
my partner, or we're in a part, but what does that look like? How do you know it's a
Mhm.
partnership? And with concrete tools and strategies, you can say, well, I know it's a partnership because here are all the things we do to make sure, we have regular check-ins, we do our, annual reviews, we do, there's so many things that are just fun to watch couples implement.
Mhm. Actually, the day that my fiance and I got engaged, a few hours after, we had this whole conversation about that platitude of marriage is hard. And I was
Mm,
really like, we were both challenging it. And it's one of those things that we dove into it and we realized how deeply ingrained that was in both of us. And
yeah,
I think as soon as like the ring was presented, it's like, oh shit, we're about to enter this hard portal. Like
right,
it's about to
right.
enter, and
No,
that's not to say again that life doesn't offer obstacles, and doesn't, that life doesn't become hard and messy at
right.
times. And the partnership or the marriage doesn't have to be like the source of difficulty.
Right. Yeah, life
And it
might present challenges, but the relationship doesn't have to present challenges. And if there are challenges, then they're easily workable, because
mhm.
again, there's the same clarity of where we're getting to. There's the same dedication to those five variables that I talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a matter of, okay, this doesn't feel good. Let's fix it. And I
Yeah.
love that. Like my husband has a great phrase, and all through our friendship before we were married, he would say it, and now it's like a mantra in our house. Like there's always a solution. There just is. It might not be the ideal solution, but there is always a solution. And when you have that dedication to a relationship and that perspective of, okay, there's solutions and now we have strategies, because it's great to say, oh, there's always a solution, but how are you going to find it? How are you going to work together to get to that solution? That's what makes it, that connection you were talking about. And again, that true partnership, because, both of you are working in the same direction. So there's so many things that couples can do that we can borrow from business and apply so well to achieve relationships that are satisfying and enduring and just really everything people want them to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
possible just with
Yeah.
that perspective.
Yeah, that feels very, just true in my body and just like an empowering truth to choose, an empowering reality to live in of like everything I want is possible and it doesn't have to be this like trudging uphill. So anyone who's listening, I invite you to kind of, you know, dive into some self-inquiry as to how that statement lives in your body, where it lives, how deeply ingrained it is, and how you orient around relationship. If it has to be hard, if it's just a reality that you've subscribed to, when maybe you don't have to, when really you
Right.
can start to question whether it has to be that, and just choose a different adjective. Relationships aren't hard. They're require dedication, or
Right.
they're require consistency. Like it just doesn't have to be one dimensional. Like relationships are hard.
That's actually one of the strategies I also use with couples is when they're trying to transition from that mindset of marriage or relationship is hard, is I talk to them about the five variables. I'm like, let's start with one. Pick one:
Mm-hmm.
dedication, diligence, attention, nurturement, or strategy. Usually I don't
Mm-hmm.
suggest strategy as the first one. It's the four others, and then we get to the strategy. So we start one at a time. Like, okay, then let's apply this. And let's use this as, especially if they're struggling with their mission statement. It's all right, let's use this as your focus. How every single day do you dedicate yourself to this relationship? Or how every single day do you give attention to the relationship? And I really try and pull them back from to your significant other, because the relationship is the business. That's how we're holding it up. And you're both partners in the business. So it isn't necessarily how do I give attention to my partner, which seems for some people it comes across as personal, and then there is that sometimes defensiveness, or well, I don't do this, and he or she does this, or they do this. So it's a matter of just choose one, and how does it support the relationship, and then we can build in the others. And usually by that time the ball is rolling and their mission statement comes easier.
Yeah, I love that. Just we're gonna wrap up here, but that final visual of like the it's like two individuals who are individual sovereign beings, and then the third entity is the relationship or the
Yeah,
business, right? Like
exactly.
you are co-founder and founder, and then this is the business, and you're making
Right.
decisions for the overall good of this outside entity, not
Mhm.
necessarily the other person.
Right.
It's this third outlier.
Yeah. So even if
Yeah.
you don't like your partner in a given moment, you're still dedicated to the
Mm.
relation to the business.
Yes, I love that. And to wrap up here, Dr. Robin, I'm curious what your final advice to women, to couples, what's your advice that you would, or prayer for the world that you would like to leave us with?
Okay. My prayer for the world is very concrete. Start looking at therapy and coaching like you do every other aspect of your life. So women see a gynecologist once a year, we see our dentist twice a year, we see different medical professions specifically each year. I don't know many people who do the same thing when it comes to taking care of their emotional and psychological well-being, whether it's individually or in a relationship. So start looking at those options as proactive parts of your overall wellness, and devote as much dedication to those as you do with your physical well-being. Because as you and I both know, Catherine, those are intimately aligned.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
You're
Well,
welcome.
how can my audience find you, keep up with you? Are you on socials? Tell us where they can find your books and learn more about, your framework?
Sure. You can find me at drrobinbuckley.com. So easy enough. I'm also on Instagram and LinkedIn. And I'm always happy to just answer even random questions when people listen to podcasts. And then if you want to engage in a more detailed conversation about what coaching looks like, I'm always happy to do that. Oh,
Beautiful.
and my book based on this framework
Yeah,
should be out in 2025, and it's called Marriage Incorporated.
cool. You have a couple other books already, though, don't you?
I do. I have a children's book. I have a book on research, which is not as exciting. And then I
Okay.
also have a book specific for advice for girls on the brink of adulthood, which was my first one.
Oh, cool. Well, that also needs to be disseminated into the world. That sounds beautiful.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Robin, your presence. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Me too, Catherine. Thank you again.
Yeah.